I think I'll have a gamble on the jackpot.
She's going for the jackpot. Try and win our jackpot prize of the motor car, and there it is. A two-door family saloon, 950 cc's in a yellow.
Freshness and value under one roof.
And the reassurance of an effective deodorant. There's no better safeguard against decay.
The gift you'll kiss the tree.
More home entertainment. There's the 12-inch black and white portable television set.
For family control.
That's the idea.
This is just the raw sound. This is just the raw sound. This is just the raw sound.
I am not he, nor master, nor lord. No crown to wear, no cross to bear in stations. I am not he, nor shall be, warlord of nations. These heroes have run before me, now dead upon the flesh pile, see, waiting for their promised resurrection. There is none, nothing but the marker, crown or cross, in stone upon these graves. Promise of the ribbon was all it took, where only the strap would leave its mark upon these slaves. What flag to thrust into this flesh? Rag, bandage, mop in their flowing death. Taken aside, they were pointed away for God, Queen and country. Now in silence they lie. They ran beside these masters, children of sorrow, as slaves to that trilogy. They had no future. They believed in democracy, freedom of speech. Yet dead on the flesh piles, I hear no breath. I hear no hope. No whisper of faith from those who died for some other's privilege. Out from your palaces, princes and queens. Out from your churches, you clergy, you Christs. I'll neither live nor die for your dreams. I'll make no subscription to your paradise. 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 I'll make no subscription to your paradise.
We can learn to reject the grey filth and shit we are told is a fact of life. We can demand and create something better. All of these things and a lot more we can learn together with those who care. And then, as individuals, we can go out into the streets and demand back the world that we know exists beneath the layer upon layer of crap that history has piled upon it.
Paradise. I'll make no subscription to your paradise.
And we can start working towards something better. It's up to us as individuals together to subvert the system that perverts our lives. We must learn to be unafraid of those in authority. We must strive for what we know is right, and rather than simply serving our own greed and selfishness, find creative ways to break the back of the system. We must write songs and poetry, make records, magazines, books, films and videos, spray messages in graffiti, and attempt to gain access to all forms of media so that our voice can be heard. We must, however, be prepared to back up our words with actions.
Crass!
They were a tragedy, weren't they? It was a terrible evening. Dreadful as we saw those scenes on television and saw how marvellous our police were.
The pattern of rioting gradually intensified with mounting anger at the deaths of the two teenagers killed by an army Land Rover.
I now realise every time I see a tragedy in the paper, we're lucky. Our son was restored to us, and I know how anyone feels if their son is missing.
A Northern Ireland minister was asked if he believed the army was to blame.
I very much regret, as I'm sure everybody does, the deaths of the two teenagers in Londonderry last night. It has to be said that some 250 people get killed on the roads in this province every year. And of course, When a riot takes place, there's much more risk of a road accident than at any other time.
And then, you know, there are some terrible cruelties and personal tragedies in life. And every day I look in the papers and read them, I know the agony they are going through. And Mark knows too.
Punk died the moment it was born. What lived was the spirit that had liberated young people in the 50s and again in the 60s and then once more in the 70s. When Crass formed at the height of the punk explosion in Britain, people thought that anarchy meant bricks through windows and riots in the street. By pumping out music and booklets, posters and propaganda, Crass tried to educate their audience into true anarchism, a life of self-determination and freedom, where individuals hold the power to control their own lives. I came upon Crass on a beach in Thailand, where I found one of their booklets. I recognised it from the symbol I'd seen decorating black leather jackets all over the world. When I went to England, I found them living a quiet and simple life in a huge old house in the countryside just outside of London. Two of the band's original members, Rimbaud and Gee Vaucher, talked to me about the achievements and failures of their own anarchist revolution.
It was about 20, maybe just over 20 years ago. Really just wanted to move into the countryside because it offered a greater freedom at that time. Several of us were painters and we just really wanted the quietness of the countryside. And we found this old house which was going very, very cheap to rent. And initially there was just people living there painting and going out to work, in a fairly conventional way. Slowly, over the first few years, maybe over 4 years, the idea developed of creating an open house, which actually wasn't a commune. And possibly still isn't. I think there's a subtle difference between an open house and a commune. And the nucleus of people who had been there initially, some of them left because they didn't like the idea of an open house. Others moved in. And we developed the house in rather on the theme that the Amish people did. We got rid of all decoration, we got rid of all ornamentation, utter simplicity. The concept behind the place that we could offer people a bed and food and company, basically in exchange for storytelling. The dream at the time was that as people sort of came to stay there and were inspired by the character and the quality of the place, that they would then move on to somewhere else in Britain and develop something similar, so that, by now, 20 years on, we had this idea that there'd be a sort of network of hostels, if you like, where people could move freely from one place to another, help in the running and the functioning of the place, and then move on. That was a dream that in no way was fulfilled at all.
to me doesn't matter. She's got a little house, she's got his little car, and they share the cup of bar. She likes to cook his meals, you know, something that appeals. Sometimes he works late, so his supper has to wait. But she doesn't really mind, 'cause it's getting overtime. He likes to put a bit away just while he does. Cause every little counts as the cost of living now. They do the booty week cooking for their lucky friends. Then they take a trip abroad, all the things they can't afford. She'd really like to have a furry like a bigger car. They could buy a bungalow with a Geordie Cooper shirt. He might think of leaving work, but no, he wouldn't like to show. He'd much rather stay and get his honest days spent. He's gonna like the work and there's no rest for the dead. She's tried to make it nice, he said thank you once or twice.
I think one of the aspects of the house was that it was also a learning process for us. I mean, obviously, we were much younger and we had a lot of ideals and dreams. And I think a lot of them are still there. Things like there's no reason why people can't live together, and there's no reason why one can't share each individual's creativity. But I would say over the 20 years that's become a little numbed. It's the same people who are creating. It's the same people who come and go, and I would say don't particularly create a lot in the house as far as moving forward. It's the same sort of staticness, which I find very disconcerting indeed. I mean, I don't mind living with groups of people and if I feel there's a growing and an evolving. It doesn't matter if it's different directions, but as long as it's doesn't become, for me, too comfortable, too the sameness. I just don't see the point. I can live on my own and do that and probably get a lot further. So, I mean, it's gone through a lot of changes, as, you know, the individuals within that. But as Pan said, it's always been an open house. It's never locked. People can come and they're quite welcome to come. And we've been through a lot of extremes of people, from people who are very, very sadly abused in their own heads to people who are very, if you like, enlightened. And we've learnt from that and are continuing to learn. And at the moment, the house is in the throes of an enormous step. I don't know in what direction yet, but it's going to make a move somewhere or other.
If the majority is always happy to be blown along in the prevailing wind, there are always those who stand against it. And if the 50s saw the birth of consumerism, it also bore two other phenomena, the peace movement and rock and roll. Both were a reaction against a world increasingly dominated by the grey men of war and their grey thoughts. Both rejected the empty glitter of consumerism. Both represented a revolution against the values of normal society. Normal society. Normal society.
At the time, I wasn't quite sure of what I was doing. I knew it was right, but I didn't really fully understand the images myself. You know, how sometimes you realise them many years later. And I think, looking back, I think it created something that people have held very strongly in their heads and are still trying to work out. It was like...
I think there's sort of that period was, there was a huge amount of questioning, sort of social and intellectual questioning going on generally, you know, throughout society. And I mean, I think we were complementing and a part of that. You know, we were asking very extreme questions and sort of just trying to turn every stone we could find about sort of our own sort of concepts, our own values. We were testing other people's concepts and other people's values in the way that I think, the avant-garde was generally involved in at that period. There was a sense of, it was the end of, or it was towards the end of the never had it so good period of British politics. There was a lot of, it wasn't that we were wealthy, but there was a sense of wealth, a sense of expansion. The society in which we lived was a developing society which had got a future, or felt it had a future ahead of it. Totally different to the sort of society that we found ourselves in 10 years after that. And within that, there was this terrific freedom to question and to turn upside down. And we used to, some of them were very extreme, some of the situations. We used to go out into the streets effectively and create absurd pieces of theatre, which just created predicaments, created questions, forced people to sort of reevaluate their stance.
You're listening to LBC Reports. It's 13 minutes to 4, and no doubt you've been hearing in the news today or during the course of LBC programmes that the Attorney-General has been asked to prosecute an anti-Falklands war record under the Obscene Publications Act. The record, How Does It Feel to Be the Mother of 1,000 Dead by the group Crass, is already reputed to have sold 20,000 copies since its release 6 days ago. It attacks Mrs. Thatcher's decision to send the task force to the Falklands, accusing her of lusting after war. Here's a sample. Well, Conservative MP for Enfield North, Tim Egger, says obscene lyrics towards the end of the disc make it the most vicious, scurrilous and obscene record ever produced. With me in the studio now are two members of Crass. Gentlemen, your decision and your response to the accusation.
The accusations that have been made against us are that the record is obscene. I consider that Margaret Thatcher, her government, Mr. Eggar, and all who support her are responsible for sending young men to be slaughtered, which in my view amounts to premeditated and calculated murder.
All right, you've made your point. Let's hear from Mr. Eggar. Why do you feel it's necessary to prosecute? Because swearing is widespread in other areas, the cinema, the television, the theatre.
Well, look, what I do object to extremely strongly is the actual language used in the last song. Now, I know that you've had to consult your lawyers over exactly what words I can repeat, because you're frightened of the legal consequences of me reading out the words in that last track.
Well, it's not
exactly. Now, wait a moment. No. That is how bad it is. And it starts off, the last song starts off with the words, "You shithead, slimy, got it all." And then it gets worse from there.
All right, you dirty, horrible luck, get your bleeding haircut! No, sir, I won't. How does it feel? How does it feel to be the mother of 1,000 dead? How does it feel to be the mother of 1,000 dead? Your language, the justice, the bodies of life. You're the deceitful, then the devil's work of sacrifice. You're not persuaded people, you're stuck on my simple life. You're thinking right, legs too, and the death should have came. fucking war!
At the house, there'd always been a room, allotted for people to go and sort of bash drums, there was a lot of free-form music. I mean, there was a period must have been 76, when there wasn't many people around at all. It seemed there was very much a sense that a period had ended. I mean, a particular dream had floundered, the hippie dream had floundered, and that the feeling of that had sort of spread. I mean, I don't think it had particularly affected our own community, our own home. But there was this sense that of change, and a lot of people had gone elsewhere and they were travelling, etc., etc. And what actually happened is that Steve turned up, as a sort of, he'd been before to the house. His brother used to be one of the sort of major figures in the house. And Steve had grown up. He was still very young, and he came in with sort of new, fresh ideas, which complemented what was going on in the music room to an extent. There was people making wild and rugged sounds, because that seemed angry sounds, but without a huge amount of direction. And what Steve was able to offer was a sort of direction. All of us had been to see, I'd seen The Clash by then. We knew the Pistols, we knew what was going on in America, that sort of thing. And take it or leave it to an extent. Steve was terribly into The Clash in particular when he turned up on this again. We hadn't seen him for several months or maybe a year or so. And he sort of tentatively sat down and wrote a song, which was I Was the Living, and said, well, why don't we try singing this to, some of the noise you're making in the music room. When we first tried it was only me around, in fact, so I drummed and he sung. And other people sort of thought, oh yeah, we could sort of put a guitar or something else. So it wasn't, we never had the idea of making a band. It was much in the way that other things had developed in the past, these two people are here and they haven't got anything better to do than to try doing this or that. And so it grew from there, really.
The thing I do is to deter any hostility of any kind, racial. If you look at the whole thing, you would see it really just plain fun. They give immense pleasure. They give immense pleasure. I too get immense pleasure. Every single thing I do, every single political thing I do, is to deter war from ever starting. Not only nuclear war, but conventional war, which is terrible. All right, it is done in entertainment. Take it as entertainment. So please don't take it any other way.
But Crass has made a lot of very self-important claims that, that it's helped awareness, that it's given out information that otherwise wouldn't have been gained. Yet, I'd still assert that, nothing of real value seems to have come of this.
What I hope we've done, what I feel we have done, is to give people an awareness of themselves. You can only say to people, is the life you're leading the one that you would actually choose? What is it that you really want to do? And what is the best way for you to lead that life which you wish?
About the state of nation, the way you treat us today. At school they give you sheets, drop you in a pit. You try, get at me, can't because they face them out. Then you're a prime example, and that ain't us to be. This is just a sample, it's up to you and me. Do they owe us a living? Of course they do, of course they do. Oh, us a living. Of course they do, of course they do. Oh, us a living. Of course they fucking do. They don't want me anymore, we're on the floor. Used to call me Sweetie, I know what it's plaything. Now that I am different, love to bust my head. You love to see me come out, love to see me think. Do they owe us a living? Course they do, of course they do. Oh, us a living. Course they do, of course they do. Oh, us a living. Of course they fucking do. Every day is on to me, I'm never gonna get. Back at this, I roll up, I'm saying everything day. Give you a love bombing for something you ain't done. Make sure I'm better, and then if it is wrong, do they know us a living? Course they do, of course they do. Oh, us a living. Course they do, of course they do. Oh, us a accelerate, cause I fucking do. Don't take any notice what the public think. So much I'm in TV, just don't wanna think. You two at the target, leave out to the fuss. You don't wanna hear it, stay off for the fuss. But I don't accelerate, cause I do, of course I do. Accelerate, cause I do, of course I do. Accelerate, cause I fucking do.
The initial idea was that people who needed somewhere came, stayed, and then moved on. Well, some people stayed and didn't move on. Some people stayed one night and moved on the next day. The majority of people who came were creative in one way or another, mostly painters or writers. And inevitably, you know, it stabilised over the years. And out of that grew the band.
For that misery of the spirit, which is betrayed in the set of a face, there are no statistics.
It is not those who can inflict the most, but those that can suffer the most who will conquer.
How does it feel?
Right, I'm rolling? Okay. The lives of millions upon millions of people are run by a small handful of ruling elites who own all the wealth, all the land, and have all the control. We're expected to be grateful to them for the privilege of having them rule our lives. We're expected to be grateful to them for the privilege of paying them for the roof over our heads. We're expected to be grateful to them for the privilege of being slaves in their factories and offices, and for the privilege of accepting their miserable wages that they pay us. They grow richer at our expense, but we're expected to look up at them as examples of success. We're expected to be grateful for the privilege of paying them huge taxes so that they can finance their oppression of us, the people. Finally, we're expected to be grateful to them for the privilege of fighting for them in their wars and killing other people like ourselves, or being killed by other people like ourselves. We're expected to love, honour and obey this wife-beater till death, quite probably premature, do us part. In this particular marriage, divorce is a hard case to fight for.
What was going on in the music scene was just dreadnought. I mean, it was awful. It was just heavy metal. It was just sex and money, and that's the rest of it, you know. And a lot had died. You know, the Beatles had disappeared. John Lennon was sort of doing. I mean, he was seen to be the only voice in the sort of wilderness. But and we were still working art-wise. I mean, I was still sort of painting and piddling around. But then I remember distinctly Patti Smith coming on the scene, and she seemed to bring together poetry and a real new sound and a different-looking woman for a start. You know, not the blonde hair and the sort of tits up in the air. It's just like somebody just doing something. And I think we both found that really exciting. And then the Pistols came along, and I'd wanted to do a newspaper for a long time. I didn't really know how to direct a lot of my imagery, because I didn't know who I was directing it to. It seemed so sort of lost out there. And I think the sort of amalgam of Patti Smith and the Pistols, I think everyone sort of felt, yeah, we can do it. Okay, we're not great musicians, we're not great anything particularly, you know, in a sense, but we have, you know, enormous energy and we have enormous compatibility, so let's just do it and see what comes out. And I think it grew from there, really, and it seemed like music was the way to converse with young people. I think at the time the word almost had gone to the background again. It was images and sound especially. And it was no good trying to converse with young people with anything else.
We'll never know how many people are now dying as a result of those attacks. It is estimated that 50% of the deaths in the two bombings resulted from burns. Anyone within half a mile of the blast stood little chance of survival, and those that did almost certainly died weeks later from radiation sickness. Long-term radiation effects are equally terrifying. Leukemia, genetic defects, retarded development, malignant diseases, shortened lifespan, death. Radioactive fallout is carried hundreds of miles by the winds and is deposited into the soil by rain and snowstorms. The number of deaths and tragedies as a result of the explosion of nuclear bombs in the Earth's atmosphere is incalculable.
The band wasn't the first thing that actually had been an external expression of what we were doing. Gee and myself were involved in a band prior to that, which we used to travel around most of the universities because that was an easy place to gig and do free gigs of very free form, sort of electronic theatre. It was a mixture of music and theatre, a circus almost. Sometimes we'd have anything up to sort of 15, 16 different performances going on at the same time. Far more in line with sort of avant-garde ideas and sort of popular ideas, which maybe Crass came to represent. The initial years were very much more involved with what's the word? I've forgotten the word. Self-sufficiency, sorry. I mean, the development of the place went hand in hand with the concepts of self-sufficiency, and we had chickens and we had goats and were able to get actually a very large amount of our food from it. And also a large amount of our emotional food we were very internalised. You know, the nucleus of the place tended not to go out very much. We lived and felt very secluded and isolated. As 20 years ago it probably was in that part of Essex. I mean, now you can sort of hear the motorway, which is a mile or so away. You can sort of see the lights of London, and the sense of isolation has been lost.
We are born free, but almost immediately we are subjected to conditioning in preparation for a life of slavery within the system. We are moulded by our parents, teachers, bosses, to conform to what they want from us, rather than from our own natural and unique desires. Anarchists believe that those natural desires for peaceful and cooperative lives are denied us because they do not serve the requirements of the ruling classes. Life should and could be a wonderful and exciting experience. Despite what the politicians say, the world is big enough for all of us if we could only learn to share it and to respect each other within it. Millions of people are governed by very few. Millions of lives of grey slavery simply so that those few can enjoy the privileges that they are the birthright of all of us. Surely, by sheer weight of numbers, we have the strength to take back what is rightfully ours. But do we have
I suppose it was to an attempt to get beyond the four walls of the house in one's attempt to relate to other people. And we did it not by just saying the words that people knew or the images that people knew. We attempted to take a route that was new to us, new to them, and perhaps out of that we could realise something different. So it was very abstract to most people. It would take the form of very symbolic movement or symbolic images and sounds. And in the beginning it involved a lot of people banging instruments, creating noises, creating a whole cacophony of sound, which was more like a chess game with sound, because you would try and complement the other person and you would work together. And in a sense it sort of left the audience out in a way, because it was to do with a group of people trying to converse together, which I was always been a bit uncomfortable about. But then it involved, people dropped off from that, and in the end it left basically me and Penn doing very symbolic work.
I always wanted to experience war. I was raised on it. Every birthday I got cap guns and helmets and canteens, played war all the time when I was a kid. Television was always war movies. Best thing for you, you know, make a man out of you.
To the man in your life, your complexion can be the most attractive thing about you.
I think every woman deserves a beauty soap that's really rather special, don't you?
The only limitations is our own imagination. We can overcome the structures that oppress us, but only if we are prepared to work hard to do so. We have the strength, we have the numbers, and with the courage of our own convictions, we can regain the right to our own lives. The non-violent revolution can and will be a reality.
Look
really did have the capacity to empty halls when we were first playing. I mean, although punk was the thing, I mean, it seemed like we weren't anything to do with that, because, I mean, we did a gig at Chelsea, which was on the King's Road, which was a sort of punk centre, and we literally did empty the hall of 500 people. I think they just walked out on us. You know, and we certainly didn't think that we had anything. We felt we got something to offer, but we didn't think anyone was going to accept it, and we didn't actually care a sod that they didn't. I mean, it quite amused us that people walked out, because we really felt that we were saying what other people were really pretending to say. You know, in fact, it seemed to us we were being very effective if we emptied a hall. The idea that there was any sort of potential as us being a rock band, and certainly any idea that we could sort of be commercially viable, was utterly unthinkable to us. And, I mean, still now in retrospect, you know, and treats it as a joke that it ever happened in that sense, which isn't to demean it. We weren't a rock and roll band, neither were we part of the music business. We were a group of people who were doing something. It could have been anything, and, you know, just as now we're not doing it and we're doing something else. You know, and just as then we couldn't see what the hell we were doing, we can't say, I don't know what the hell I'm doing now, you know, and I'm glad about that. Part of the reason why Crass ended, because we could all see what we were doing, you know. We could advertise a gig anywhere in the world, if you like, 500 or 600 people or a few thousand people turn up, we go on stage, do our little bit, come off stage, hand out a few handouts. It's all pretty sort of easy or pretty predictable. I mean, that's not what we're about. As long as we don't know what we're doing, then we're doing something. The moment we know what we're doing, then, you know, we may as well go to sleep. I prefer to go to sleep, really.
Play the whole lot.
Their arms have been steel, their blood the oil of machinery, their bodies are the ballast of war, their souls are the blast of it, the power, the trickle of hope, the trilliard bodies of lost time, too many to respect, too many to feel, too many to know, too many to remember, the distorted and the burnt, and the scarred, and the torn, and the squashed, and the cut, and the forgotten. Body and flesh and energy, the lost makings of the future, now decays and reforms, in the green banks of unseen battlefields. How quaint a tribute to such savage slaughter. Those young boys have been denied the chance to realize and to become. They too might have been standing here. I carry these bodies from the poppy fields. I lay them before you. Is this shame that you too shall rot?
Obsessive-compulsive personality.
Why can't I breathe?
Evacuate. Evacuate. Evacuate.
And he began to suffocate, and his possessions multiplied. And he began to suffocate, and his possessions multiplied. And he began to suffocate, and his possessions multiplied. And he began to suffocate. If you begin to feel overload, you will begin to feel what we are saying. If you begin to feel overload, consider your Earth, what it feels.
60 seconds and counting. Fire 2. 50 seconds. 40 seconds. 30 seconds and counting. Scramble. 20 seconds. 15. Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2. One.
When Crass was effective, which was really only its first 3 years, we didn't think we were doing anything. It started to become ineffective when we started thinking we were doing something. We started becoming sort of obsessed, to an extent, obsessed with our own self-importance. That's all you ever heard. You could sit around the house. Other people would come to visit and to talk, to offer their sort of vision, and they didn't get a look in, you know. There was 10 of us, we were right on a high and riding along the crest of it.
I think that's unfair. That's not true. I mean, lots of people came, they wanted to talk about Crass, and half the time one didn't want to talk about Crass, you know.
Yes,
that was, you know, it was 50-50 that way. I mean, obviously if there was a project going on, then you could discuss that with people who came, and they would probably have something to give to that project. But a lot of the time people would come to see Crass. You know, who is this Crass? You know, I'm not Crass, I'm Gee, you know. People are individuals here. But very often that would take very little time to get rid of that, and you could talk about other things.
But it was a serpent eating its own tail, because we didn't have the time to offer people. I mean, if we were doing however many tours, we were in the studio, we were rehearsing, we didn't actually have the time to offer and concentrate on what people were bringing, you know, and that's what I mean. And the serpent ate its own tail, which is exactly what the symbol was. I mean, it's ironic, really, that, you know, we went up our own arse, which is what the Crass symbol was about, you know, of a system devouring itself.
You can tell a master butcher by the way he selects the best, by the way he prepares the best, by the way he cuts off what you do want, and by the way he cuts off what you don't want. By the way, there are butchers just like this, taking so much care behind the scenes.
The hungry pack must feed, and something must die to satisfy that hunger.
Like the politicians then, the politicians now see the world in the same arrogant, simplistic terms, speaking of dominoes as if nations are mere blocks of wood.
No, I wouldn't give up meat.
And if 30 million people a year are dying of hunger or of hunger-related diseases?
No, I still wouldn't give up meat.
While people starve elsewhere, 9/10 of the grain grown in the United States is fed to animals so that we can eat meat.
The result is that we feed pigs better than many third-world countries feed people.
A lot of them should get enough food, shouldn't they? What do they spend their money on?
If they starve, innit? It's up to them. It's the way they put their selves, isn't it? Feathers burn so easily, the cat is blinded in the garden. Lost vision, the lark is fled. The cattle shed gives off the smell of Sunday kitchen. The gentle eye, dispensable perfection. Before the flush take 2 weeks' food, all the sacks all up and hide. All of us here know it, we grew it, fighting amongst ourselves, leaving bits of flesh on barbed wire, and blood on the floor. Nothing was across the door, covered in varnish and gold.
I just got totally saturated, especially with their problems, if you like, their massacres, their bodies, dead bodies. I just felt, I've got to step away from this now. I can't take a lot more of this. And there's another side of us all, which is the beautiful side, and yet we've been involved. I think, quite rightly, we're involved with all of that shit that we're given and give each other. But there was another side, and I suppose that's the attempt of one of the records, which was Acts of Love.
We must beat the bomb and the gun. We must protect the law-abiding citizen wherever they are in the United Kingdom, always.
The police and the soldiers are required, if necessary, to shoot to kill to maintain order. That is civil defense in nuclear war.
Beg the question, bend the truth, bail out the bedroom while there's holes in the roof. In the beginning they said it was light, there ain't much left of it now. We're lost in the darkness, and you send a sight of answers to the what or how. We're talking about freedom while we're locked in a cell, dreaming of a world without war. Folks to live on the bounds of hell, not no one's ever thought of peace before. What's the point of bringing peace to something unreal? What's the point of talking love, you still nothing real? When the unbidden understood, when the truth is lies. That's point on my head, you got to be in the eyes. Beg the question, bend the truth, bail out the bedroom while there's holes in the roof. In the beginning they said there was light, but someone has burned out a fuse. And now we're all lost in eternal night, looking for a candle to use. Lots of little candles to isolate hope, found little flames to gale. Lost little people who just got done, knocking their heads on a nail. What's the point of talking freedom if you're jumping on yourself? The point of bringing sharing, that's your human, that's your realm. So that you tell me giving if the things you give ain't real. It's easy to lie if you ain't got a thing to feel. Beg the question, beg the truth, bail out the bathroom while there's holes in the roof. In the beginning they said it was light, we never had the eyes to see. But rather than struggling or put up a fight, we ran like lemons to the sea. No one really wants to get it all together, it's easier just to grab what you can. Everybody's going in, hell for leather, three little castles on the sand. Hypocrisy, illusion, life and deceit. Think only of yourself and the world's at your feet. I don't believe the things you say, they bullshit on the truth. Because you play offensive and you like to live it through. Beg the question, beg the truth, bail out the bedroom while there's holes in the roof.
Next week on Some Punks Never Die, G and Penny talk about their attempts to mobilise Britain's youth against the most reactionary regime in England's democratic history. Long March to the Lockup finishes off the Crass story, 10 p.m. next Wednesday on JJJ.
Beg the question, bend the truth, bail out the bedroom while there's holes in the roof. In the beginning they said it was light, I'm tired of hearing their lies. I'm tiredly seeking a path of fight, I'm going to use my own eyes. Gonna make my decisions, live my life, they keep their darkness and gloom. Hypocrisy, trickery, I'm had enough, they kick the destruction and doom. I've only one life and I live it my way. They can keep their restriction and law. If they think living I have one thing to say. Fuck off, cause I've had it before!
I think I'll have a gamble on the jackpot.
She's going for the jackpot. Try and win our jackpot prize of the motor car, and there it is. A two-door family saloon, 950 cc's in a yellow.
Freshness and value under one roof.
And the reassurance of an effective deodorant.
There's no better safeguard against decay.
Or home entertainment. There's a 12-inch black and white portable television set.
For family control. That's the idea.
This is just the raw sound. This is just the raw sound. This is just the raw sound.
I am not he, nor master, nor lord. No crown to wear, no cross to bear in stations. I am not he, nor shall be, warlord of nations. These heroes have run before me, now dead upon the flesh pile, see, waiting for their promised resurrection. There is none, nothing but the marker, crown or cross, in stone upon these graves. Promised the ribbon was all it took, where only the strap would leave its mark upon these slaves. What flag to thrust into this flesh? Rag, bandage, mark. masters, children of sorrow, a slave to that trilogy. They had no future. They believed in democracy, freedom of speech, yet dead on the flesh piles. I hear no breath. I hear no hope, no whisper of faith from those that died for some other's privilege. Out from your palaces, princes and queens. Out from your churches, you clergy and Christ. I'll neither live nor die for your dreams. I'll make no subscription to your paradise. I'll make no subscription to your paradise. I'll make no subscription to your paradise. I'll make no subscription to your paradise.
Well, gentlemen and ladies, my name is Inspector Savage from Scotland Yard, and this gentleman is Detective Constable White. I'm here today to ask you some questions in connection with complaints we've received. I'll ask you the questions and my colleague here will take down the replies. Now, you understand that you have been cautioned. Firstly, I'd like you to identify this record.
Daytime, that thou hearest not, and in the night season, and I am not silent. But thou art holy, O that inhabitest the priests of Israel. Our fathers trusted in thee, they trusted on their disdainful prayer. They cried unto thee, and were delivered. They trusted in thee, and were not confounded. But I am in the world.
I am no feeble Christ, not me. He hangs in glib delight upon his cross, above my body, lowly me. Christ forgive, forgive, holy he holy, shit he forgives. Forgive, forgive, I, me, I vomit for you, Jesu, Christi Christus, puke upon your papal throne. Wrapped you are in the bloody shroud of churlish suicide. Wrapped I am in the bloody cloud of hellish genocide, petulant child. I have suffered for you, where you have never known me. I too must die. Will you be shadowed in the arrogance of my death, your valley truth? What lights pass those pious heights? What passing bells for these in their trucks? For you, Lord, you are the flag-bearer of these nations, one against the other that die in the mud. No piety, no deity, is that your forgiveness? Saint, martyr, goat, Billy, forgive? Shit he forgives. He hangs upon his cross in self-righteous judgment, hangs in crucified delight, nailed to the extent of his vision. His cross, his manhood, his violence, guilt, sin. He would nail my body upon his cross, as if I might have waited for him in the garden, as if I might have perfumed his body, washed those bloody feet. This woman that he sees, suicide vision, death reveler, rapist, grave digger, earth mover, life fucker, Jesu. You scooped the pits of Auschwitz. The soil of Treblinka is rich in your Stigma, stigmata, errata, eraser. The cross is the mast of our oppression. You fly there, vain flag. You carry it. Wear it on your back, Lord. Your back. Enola is your gaiety. Suffer, little children. Suffer in that horror. Hero horror. Horror hero. Hero shimmer. Shimmer hero. Hero shimmer. Hero shimmer. Hiroshima. Hiroshima. The bodies are your delight. The incandescent flame is the spirit of it. They come to you, Jesu, to you. The nails are the only trinity. Hold them in your corpsey gracelessness, the image that I have had to suffer. These nails at my temple. The cross is the virgin body of womanhood that you defile. In your guilt, you turn your back, nailed to that body. Lame-ass Jesus calls me sister. There are no words for my contempt. Every woman is a cross in his filthy theology. He turns his back on me in his fear. His vain delight is the pain I bear. Alone he hangs. His choice. Alone, alone. His voice. He shares nothing, this Christ. Sterile, impotent, fuck-love prophet of death. He is the ultimate pornography. Hear us, Jesus. You sigh alone in your cock fear. You lie alone in your cunt fear. You cry alone in your woman fear. You die alone in your man fear. Alone, Jesu, alone in your cock fear, cunt fear, woman fear, man fear. Alone in your fear, alone in your fear, alone in your fear. Your fear, your fear, your fear, your fear, your fear, your fear, your fear. Warfare, 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 warfare. Jesus died for his own sins, not mine.
His own soul. A sea shall serve him. It shall be appointed to the Lord for a generation. There shall be a nation dwell with righteousness, and a people that
From the start, we were saying, you can see there's something wrong. You know, we'll list as many as we can see that we share. These are things that we share. You know, these are common forms of oppression, the common forms of fear. We'll list them. You find your answer. You know, we've got our answer. You know, which we did have. We had a very comfortable and beautiful home, very secure friendships. To some extent, we'd found our answer. What we wanted to do is to disturb people into questioning their own stance. You know, so that the two might look for and find an answer. And as G said earlier, I think, you know, thousands of people did precisely that. So in that sense, you know, yes, we were highly successful. I don't think we ever felt that, you know, we had an audience which we could exploit, which is what is suggested in what you're saying. Not at all. You know, we felt a part of a mass of people, part of a consciousness. We had the power which other people within that consciousness didn't have. We had the access, you know, through the interest that media had in us, to put forward ideas that we felt represented that body. At no way at all did we ever look to that body and say, well, you know, there's X million people out there, let's do such and such, let's twist it this or that way. Not at all. We were very much, I believe and hope, a reflection of that, rather than, you know, we weren't leaders, we were a part of a body. What we knew we had, which no one else had within that movement, was the access to media. And that was severely limited, hampered and fucked around with as much as the state, you know, was able to. But nonetheless, we were able to get through a net that other people weren't able to get through. So therefore, when something like the Falklands happened, you know, it was inevitable that it was us who was going to be set up, if you like, to comment on it. We'd have preferred not to. We'd have preferred to have, you know, been sticking to the subjects which actually were more, we felt more important. You know, effectively, you know, how we deal with each other, you know, how we can develop, you know, that consciousness. Because being drawn into simply making sort of attacks on the Falklands wasn't dealing with our consciousness. You know, it was dealing with their consciousness, and increasingly what happened as we wisely, I think, used the power we had. You know, we found we were increasingly getting involved in simply being an opposition to, as opposed to, you know, a developing consciousness. And that eventually, you know, as I think Gee suggested, you know, in how she described it, and alienated us from that consciousness. You know, so we simply became the opposition. You know, the predictable people who are going to do the predictable thing when they, you know, the opposition, do their predictable thing. We'll be the counterattack, you know, and that eventually we were isolated in that. Eventually, you know, we were sort of people on the front line without any backing, because the backing very wisely was getting on with its own consciousness.
All right, you dirty horrible lot, get your bleeding haircut! No, sir, I won't.
Fear that provokes nuclear war. Fear that fuels the arms race. America seeks to stay in front. Russia won't fall behind. Although each side can destroy the other many times over, both refuse to call a halt. It is in Europe where NATO plans to counter a theoretical Soviet assault with nuclear weapons, if necessary. Flexible response, it's called.
We depend for our export trade upon selling £1,200 million worth a year of arms.
It's not just the biggest epidemic of our times, but it won't be cured until the patient recognizes that he's sick.
We had tried to demonstrate our sense of freedom with humour and love, and we were met with violence and hate, which we in turn attempted to combat with our reason and intelligence. We failed. We finally realised that the state, those who work within it and those who live beneath its authority, were the enemy of our freedom, and that we must look for ways other than well-reasoned words with which to oppose them.
Sorry, much money spent on war when the rulers of the world is so hopelessly poor. Major General Disrespect is at his best, planning a new mode of attack. He's quite unconcerned about drugs or risk. The Major General, the heart that's a crack. Yes, he designs a cruise missile, tactically sound, operationally okay. While the Stalins roll on to the death pile, they contemplate their fate another day. Attack on the line, passing closet defense. I ask you again, as before, do the starving millions and don't stand a chance undefeated by this stupid war. Babies live with hunger before they can walk. Mothers with dry breasts cry dry tears. And meanwhile Major General Despair gives a talk on increase the war budget over years. How can they do it? These men are still. How can they block destruction pain? Is it the only way they can feel? By killing again and again.
It's the part of themselves that has died from this, and as they do as husbands do. It's the right responsibility to stop they do. There's so many of us that get left their way at the moment in life, man. We've got to rise up to their power, mate, save the world they're doing. But destroying the world, they make it feel there's no kind of insulation. They've got responsibility, millions of dead, next to their dead on destruction. Generals and politicians advocate wars in the way the way they should be. They should spend sleepless nights shooting fear and by no time crawling the death pit.
They'll find the truth that when it's done their best to cause you down and climb my island of skulls to end the stand. See the truth of being straight, blows down home the wind, yes, we try to grasp the tree. Master of all, what they care, old sentiment sees. Down rock with wild, they give it away from the absolute pride. They give it a coaching, don't the grave, they put the millions of die. Destroy what many for the music game, make life a fire of fear. Destroy a man who had their own, make fears from the chair. We do care it's our home, they've been acting too long. If it's a fight they want, it's beginning. Throughout history been expected to sing their dance song, but now it's our turn to lead the singing. Fight war, not wars, make peace, not war. Fight war, not wars, we know you've heard before. Fight war, not wars, make peace, not war. 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 1, 2, 3, 4, we know what you're fucking war. 1, 2, 3, 4, we know what you're fucking war. 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't have civilization anymore. We have
is confirmation of the apparent reality in which we exist. A constant, violent reminder of the length to which those that impose that reality will go. We are prisoners within that reality.
We can win.
Until we create our
We can win. I want you to sense your own strength.
I think a lot of the outrageous punks, if you like, you see on the street now aren't part of that old militaristic sort of, or militant, I would say, fraction. They're more there for they're posers. It's the show. They're selling themselves to the press, you know, and to the... I mean, today when I came in, I couldn't believe how many adverts were on the billboards where there was a punk. The punk's become a prop, you know, in that sense. You know, and I think a lot of the people who have been and still are in earnest about trying to change, you know, the degrading aspect of how people have to live are underground now and are working in some way. I've lost contact with some of those people, but I'm sure they're still going on.
The system quietly murders people, yet still it is respected by the majority. The system openly murders people, yet still it's respected by the majority. The system noisily murders people, yet still it's respected by the majority. The system is prepared to wage vicious civil war, as in Northern Ireland, or to consider the horror of total annihilation in a global nuclear war, yet still it's respected by the majority.
The first nuclear bomb exceeded by 1,000 times the explosive force of any weapon ever made before. Instead of one nuclear weapon, there are now over 50,000, more than 1,000,000 times the explosive power of the Hiroshima bomb. 4 tons of high explosive for each of the 4,000 million men, women and children on this planet.
I think it's money well spent, and I can't see what's wrong with it.
Those who are obedient will stay put, doubtless stiffened in their resolve by the knowledge that if they flee, no authority elsewhere will give them food or shelter.
Well, inspired by the salt marches, we actually did start out planning a sort of mass march across the country, and I mean there was terrific interest in it, and I think there would have been thousands and thousands of people on it. The idea was to start up in Cumbria at Sellafields, the nuclear plant there, and sort of call in at government installations all the way down to London. Well, we called it off because not because we were specifically afraid, but we were we knew we were setting up thousands of people to what would have been probably one of the most sort of violent series of confrontations, for this century, if you like. I mean, it would have been total violence from start to finish, and we had to pull out. Smaller groups could do it. I mean, the smaller sort of revolutionary groups in the country could do it because they'd probably maybe get 20 or 30 people, which wouldn't actually create too much trouble and actually could possibly just about get away with doing it. We knew that we'd get thousands and thousands of people on it, and we had organised, we'd got the contingency plans to do it, but it is one of the sort of few projects we aborted because we realised, and we actually got quite attacked for having aborted it, we were told we'd sold out, etc., but we could not front, something that dangerous, because that's precisely what it would have been.
And I think, again, one knew the sort of people it would pull out. I mean, they're very young people, very idealistic, they're very noticeable, really noticeable by the way they dress, by everything, which is fine, and people can dress the way they like, but I mean, as far as the authority was concerned, you were a prime target just by walking down the street, and that was happening more and more and more, that just by the way you looked, young people were getting picked up, and that wasn't on to sort of set people up. And as Penn said, we had worked out the campsites, the fields where we could stop each night. I mean, there was a certain euphoria about it. It was very exciting. I'd love to have done it. And to make that march and to draw people just down the country and make that statement of whatever, but it wasn't on in the end because of what was happening on the streets, what was happening with Thatcher's government and with her forces. That you just couldn't set people up like that. And in the end, when it gets that big, you cannot control a crowd like that. If they get angry, they get angry. And you know that a real young anger, enthusiastic anger, is just going to land them in jail. And overnight, the government makes a fortune.
Is there anyone prepared to tell me why? Tell me why I'm being such dry. Oh yes, that is yours and this is mine. As long as the balance is out, that's fine. I don't define the terms of the oppression. You wait till a dull and grey depression. You ride on me. Suck my energy. You take what you want when you want it. You reject any change that I make. You ask me for more when I spent it. When I've given it all, you still
So as Brixton, Toxteth and Mosside burn, the system closes in to strengthen its grip and controls get tighter. The police are given even greater powers, and the army, fresh from the training grounds of Belfast and Londonderry, wait in the shadows. The government, those in authority, and all those who serve and support them are placing the people in an impossible stranglehold.
Then they find their mate. The female crams into the male, where she'll live the rest of her life. It's a simple life.
She lovely.
Yes, isn't she?
I'm gonna pinch you. I'm gonna pinch you. I am.
The last gig we did, which was a Welsh miners' benefit in Wales, it was a great gig, but there was very, very much a sense, we were a bunch of Herberts on a stage, and they were a bunch of Herberts not on the stage, and there was a separateness about us which one could feel. It wasn't complete, it wasn't total, but we'd become yet another rock and roll band, and that isn't what we are. And rather than we could have still, I think, we've been doing very nicely, thank you, out of it, but that's not, we had to say no, we had to stop.
I think another aspect of that question was that there were, at that time, a lot of really huge gatherings of people in this country, or in Germany and France, against the nuclear issue, against the arms race, and several other things. But I mean, it would seem at that time that you would, in a weekend, if you called a march against the cruise missile, you'd have something like 60,000 people on the street. And in other ways, I would say that although we didn't manipulate or use the audience that we knew we had, there were issues like Stop the City, where we would be part of that. I don't know if you know anything about Stop the City, where it was an attempt, a dream to stop the city, stop the financial city for a day, which is obviously not possible, not in the way one was doing it, which is with peaceful means. But it was an attempt to slow it down at least. And I think that we found increasingly things that we were involved with, like Stop the City, where you would get large crowds of a particular people, which would be punks, which would be misfits. I think increasingly this government and the forces, like the police force, were very, very tuned in to what to expect, who to pick up, very, very easily. There was no way, what with the second and the third Stop the City, that you could fight that force. You were being set up, we were being set up. We were part of being set up, where, the arms of the government were against you. And it was increasingly obvious that you couldn't take to the streets in that way anymore. They knew what to do, the police force. They knew exactly your move. So I think in the end, it was very much forced to go underground.
It originated out of London group of anarchists, fronted in this case by Greenpeace London, I think they're called, who aren't Greenpeace International. Amongst some of the band are involved in that. Basically, the idea was simple, that you sabotage installations in the city either by human presence or by human activity. and try and make it inoperable for a day. I mean, I think on most occasions, fairly important days were chosen when, for one reason or another, if it managed to stop the city that day, it would have had some effect on the stock exchange, which it did. I mean, on all of the stock cities did have a small effect on the stock exchange. The problem, as always with things like that, is how do you let the people know? How do you get the information out? Well, the first one, in fact, because we hadn't got any sort of major thing coming up, we were only able to promote at gigs, etc., and that was reflected in the numbers. There wasn't that many people on the first Stop the City. It was also far the most enjoyable. It was fun. It was a celebration. It was very much in the hands of the knowing. I mean, that's always been the case. It's like the early Stonehenge festivals. If you like, you get the hardened professional hippies at the first Stonehenge. You've got the hardened professional sort of street artists and punks at the first Stop the Cities, and they're fun because people know what the hell they're doing. Progressively, I mean, the second Stop the City, we effectively advertised in a single that we put out, which went to thousands and thousands of homes, and so thousands and thousands of people turned up to it, and it was pretty ugly. A lot of very young people turned up, they wearing their punk gear, and they're obvious targets. I mean, members of the band, for example, used to be more effective in acts of sabotage, used to dress up in city suits for Stop the City and would have no hassle all day, and in fact were able to do quite a degree of damage. 10 people could often have done more damage in a day than was probably done in some of the Stop the Cities, because there were so many people that, the only damage was just lots of people hanging around causing a nuisance, but also a lot of young people getting pretty severely abused by the police, who progressively learned how to deal with it. You break people up into small parties, then you break the small party into a smaller party until there's only a few left, then you nobble them. No one's there to see, no one really cares. All very organised. They did, as you saw, they did precisely that with Stonehenge.
Authority does not exist without the value and support that we give it. As long as we, the people, bow down to the system, authority will exist, and so will the system. Either we accept that we are to live as mindless robots in a world that is walking the tightrope of nuclear war, where security checks will become a way of life, where the streets are patrolled by tanks and the skies by helicopters, where the people no longer dare to speak of what they feel and believe for fear of those who might be listening, where love is a memory, peace is a dream, and freedom simply does not exist. Or we demand our rights, refuse to be part of the authority that denies them, and recognize that the system is nothing but a small handful of ruling elites who are powerless without our support. We have the strength, but do we have the courage? We have the strength, but do we have the courage?
What have I done? But you won't need what's done. before. What did she say? There is none. And so you drive the world to war, but this war will not be lost or won. The desolation that you've seen but never saw is a lesson that you teach but never learn. Would you see the fire in the world where you exist? Would your hard eyes register pain? Are you so cold that there is no distress? When does death begin death again? The flowers in your landscape, some withered rose, and on the corpses where they lay. Haunted, where all hope died, froze by the horror of your acts compelled to stay. What now? Now you would destroy the earth. Why? What now? Now in your control, birth, death, dry the bodies. I never saw this in your lasting after death. I determined that your destiny should be shared. Unnoticed in your blindness, the miracle of breath. What element of beauty attracts your pure desire? Would you see the burning? Is that your delight? Would you have witnesses in your stead? Would you feel my yearning? Peace, life, light, body, breath. Would you take all this? What now? Now you would destroy the earth? Now, the riverbeds. What now? Now in your control, birth and death, drive the bodies incandescent in the heat. What is not a sin's cause deprived, what is the shame? Your empty eyes, head wise, I share your lust of death. Your die level wise, I share your fear of breath. Right,
And I remember the last Stop the City, when I became totally disillusioned with Stop the City, really feeling, and it wasn't a patronising, it was a paternalistic view. I felt these are my children, you know, this is what Crass has created. Hundreds and thousands of very young kids, you know, beautiful young kids with dreams and hopes and aspirations who were prepared to put that on the line, you know, prepared to bloody come out and act. But hadn't got the suss, hadn't got the experience we had. I mean, Christ alive, most of us are over 40 now. We've got the experience to know how to do it. You know, and I do it. You know, and I was sort of still dressed in chains and spiky hair at the last Stop the City, but I wasn't going to get stopped because I had experience. They know damn well they're not going to pick on someone who's got sus. They're going to pick on all those little kids, and that's what happened. It happened time and time again in different circumstances. And that's why, you know, in my own case, and I think in the case, you know, I can't speak for G, but I believe it's probably right, you know, that once it's got to be done some other way, you know, that's a terrible position to be in, you know, where we became this sort of factor that could call out thousands. I mean, that was a small version of what might have happened if we'd done the march. It would have been hideous. We wouldn't have got hit. You know, we've got lawyers, we know how to deal, we know the law, you know, we know our rights. These kids haven't yet learned that. They'll learn it, and they'll be very effective revolutionaries maybe in 10 years' time when they've been through all of that. But it's a pretty harsh way to learn if you're, you know, a 16-year-old.
Yeah, even on the simplest level. I mean, of the police coming up, they would say things to provoke. They would call you a scum or call you all sorts of things. But, you know, if you have experience, it goes through you and out the other side. It doesn't mean a damn thing, because that you know what it is. But I saw young kids just responding to that, and exactly what they wanted. I mean, they would just almost hit the police. You know, and it's just, you know, it's garbage to them. They just throw them in. and in no way gently. I mean, they were thrown in those back of those vans and kicked in, and for what? What does, being called a name mean? But that's the experience, and that was the level of what do they fight? What are they fighting? Are they fighting one policeman who's abusing them verbally? Or are they fighting something beyond that, And it's the very, very small details which every time you could see young people becoming victims of. And it's very difficult to cover that because you cannot teach that. It's a process of growing up. You can give guidelines, but you have to let people go through their growing up. You can't say, don't do this, don't do that, because it's not. You can't say that to anybody, but you can give information or say, if you attempt this is what could happen. All right, it's up to you now. If you think you can handle it, then go ahead. But that's very difficult to cover every individual in that way because, again, every individual is different. You can only give a broad amount of information for people to act on.
In your brain, and imagination gonna blow you away. Who gives a fuck cause it's work for the people? Compromised labour, you build your death with super goodies, more time with a family. Don't be fooled with a gesture of equality. Only in a sequel, you outright colds, staring at each other to feel like it first. Calls and experiments, don't fight by. What do we know about Donald French right? Atomic power, their shower, magic power, she holds it over you. You understand? No pretender to when the people win. Another white planet gets wiped in the air. Picture for the modern world, you might be there. Oh, you gotta let it shower over you. You great energy that sucks up yours. Giving all your wants and the cells in your bones. Making no justice but people like choice. Rules and experiments to the fucking noise. Atomic power, another their blood. Build their fire planet detonation. Expose us to contamination. Contamination, 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 contamination. Go to the stars, put the fucking noise, atomic power, and I'm gonna fly, fly right away! They using skateboards, spastic chairs, the legless fuckers who thought your affairs. Moulded baby stomachs with a permanent smile. Keep the bleeders early in rank and file. Giving you the chance to be a plastic wrap. Round a doggy's meat can full of fucking crap. Making little darlings don't tell you it's a boy. Baby mama tender love to bring you lots of joy. Making plastic families all over these folk. Shake your choice and worship, what fucking out.
There is no future but our own, because there is no authority but our own. You and I, who love this planet Earth, are its rightful inheritors. It is time to stake our claim.
Teaching little John needs a shoot a gun. A terrific racist father to get to know your son. Spare parts, body parts, are somebody. Ever seen a lesson of some poor squatty? Signs in the food stores advertising meat, beef, blood, chuck roast, love to roll a week. Saying you like it, a sign that you do. They don't have to bullshit until you have to choke. Follow it all, without fucking scream. Sitting there quietly, at night street. Be a fucking different, finish your name. If they ask a question, you'd ask them when. Think they're all bad time, that's all I'm saying. Chicken dies, sugar dies, all the same okay. You make the choice, money says the crime. Tight little egos, looking for a time. I ain't got it, see your bit. Middle class, working class, all a lot of shit. Middle class, working class, all a lot of shit. Middle class, working class, oh, allow no shit. Oh, allow no shit. S-I-T, shit. a load of shit! Shit! It's all that fucking shit!
The next time a movement like punk happens, you know, it has to be that much more succinct. It has to be clearer in its objective. Because ultimately, if you don't have an objective, where the hell... I mean, I remember at Stop the City, basically, the police would stop people and say, what are you doing, where are you going? And people wouldn't know what they were doing, and they wouldn't know where they were going, so they would never get there. I mean, it's an old hackneyed saying of mine, but I mean, I would compare it to karate, where the brick, you know, a karate master doesn't aim for the brick, aims for space beyond the brick. You know, if you aim at the brick, you'll break your hand. If you aim at the space beyond the brick, and you go straight through the brick. And I think that was the problem that we got into. We were aiming for the brick, and we were just breaking our skulls.
For that misery of the spirit, which is betrayed in the set of a face, there are no statistics.
It is not those who can inflict the most, but those that can suffer the most who will conquer.
Desire for change had to be coupled with the desire to work for it. If it was worth opposing the system, it was worth opposing it totally. It was no longer good enough to take what we wanted and to reject the rest. It was time to get back into the streets and attack, to get back and share our experiences and learn from the experiences of others. A year after Wally's death, the Pistols released Anarchy in the UK. Maybe they didn't really mean it, man, but to us it was a battle cry. When Rotten proclaimed that there was no future, we saw it as a challenge to our creativity. We knew that there was a future if we were prepared to work for it. It's our world, it's ours, and it's been stolen from us. We set out to demand it back. Only this time round, they didn't call us hippies, they called us punks.
They said that we were trash. Well, the name is Crass, not Clash. They can stuff their punk credentials, just them that take the cash. They won't change nothing in festival talk. RAR badges in their protest wall. Bands of white men standing in a park, objecting to racism, to carry in the dark. Black man's got his problems, he's right to deal with it. Snap for yourself real with your white liberal shit. If you care to take a close look at the way things really stand, you'll see the long shots niggas to the rulers of this land. Punk was once an answer 2 years on crack. A way of saying no, we'd always said yes. The moment we saw our rights be free, they eventually divided life through credibility. The qualifying factors of politics and class left the macho street fighters with his gas. Except on a racism, a devil on the street. He was out of form and fashion for the social elite. Bigotry and blindness, a Marxist joke, another clever trick to keep us all in line. These little labels to keep us all apart, keep us all divided when the troubles start.
Obscene articles have appeared daily in the press. The dehumanising term argy has been coined to make the death and mutilation of fellow human beings appear commonplace and ordinary. Page 3 pin-ups have appeared wearing an assortment of nationalistic insults. Desperate sweethearts flashed their knickers as the QE2 sailed away with its cargo of gunpowder. Britain relived the war years, rallying to its blood-stained flag in some dreadful memory of a power that once held half the world in its imperialist grip. Now that grip is a weak-wristed fantasy that through sheer arrogance would risk the safety of the whole planet. How long must young men continue to die for the greed of governments? How long must young women exploit their bodies to support this psychosexual fantasy of war? The big bang, big fuck, enough. We must learn to say no.
Keep your petty prejudice, I don't see the point. Anarchy and freedom is what I want.
I mean, I think something like Elvis, for example, was sexually liberating. There's no question of that. I think the Beatles were spiritually liberating. There's no question about that. I think that punk and particularly ourselves, you know, were intellectually liberating. But then each and every one of those have had crossovers as well. It isn't the revolution, it is a part of, unavoidable part of any step forward revolutionary movement is its music, because its music is its celebration. in that sense, it's terribly important, but I mean, as it's unavoidable, it's also unimportant. I mean, you can't not have it. I mean, whenever anything's happening, you know, it will have its music, it will have its art, it will have its images. I mean, the Russian Revolution was followed by the most, and inspired by the most sort of outrageous developments in art and music, you know, and that will always happen. So in that sense, one doesn't have to attach. I mean, the big mistake the music industry makes is they're all sitting there looking for the next thing. They can't do that because the next thing's happening. You know, it's not going to happen, it is happening. And when the musical next thing happens, it will have happened before they've even seen it. You know.
But I think, yeah, you're right there, but I don't think that's got anything to do with the public. I mean, one's seen over the last couple of years how the major record companies are very aware of social comment, you know, and so are the bands that are creative. They not only attempt to make, you know, facile social comment, but they also have a title, you know, that's, you know, their bands seem to reflect it. But then you get things like this, you know, aid concerts for this, that, and the other, and all the paraphernalia that goes with that. I mean, I think it's quite amusing seems like what's going to happen at the moment. They've just realised that major English companies of all, you know, types have been shipping arms to Iran. Now, I think if EMI are called up to account for themselves would be really amusing, because that sort of makes a circle for me in that whole EMI being the backers of some of this big social comment music, but also, you know, as everyone knows now, you know, they're one of the biggest in the arms people, you know, and it would be it would be horrendous if they were pulled over the coals for it. They won't be, because they're too big, I think, but they definitely have been, without doubt, supplying arms, if not to Iran, some other sort of notable country against the law, you know.
Well, U2, I saw a programme about U2 the other day, and they said that rock and roll had taken on a social conscience, you know, at the time of Aid, what was it called, Live Aid, you know, which has to be the most naive, arrogant, fucking stupid. I mean, that really angered me, you know. They're sort of put forward as being the sort of thinking person's rock and roll band at the moment. You know, and to say that Live Aid, what Live Aid did was when the music business realised that there was a huge market in caring, you know, and they exploited that, you know, and I'm sure that some of the people involved were perfectly genuine, you know, and unwittingly were used. But the music business, that was the end of punk. You know, if ever there was an end, you know, punk as the people's music, because what the music biz did was to put together a caring programme. Exactly what Thatcher's doing at the moment. We're the people who care. We're the people who want you to have your own house. We want to give you back your dignity. By stripping you of it, we'll give it to you. Well, it's exactly the same with Live Aid. You know, we all care. It really matters. Look at these, you know, we've done our bit. You know, you've given your £5. Well done. Here's a pat on your back. Buy me next album. You know, and U2 and Bob Geldof and the whole bloody rest of them. Have you heard of anything happening since then? That was the end of it. The whole independent thing, you know, which was broadly punk, ended at that point. Because what the independent thing represented, and particularly the punk thing represented prior to that, was caring, meaning, values, thought, love, peace, you know, all of the platitudes. And along comes, you know, Bob Geldof in his naivety, you know, and he was used hook, line and sinker, you know, and now the music business is back in total control again.
What are they playing at? No lot of music, no lot of words, no lot of silly much of kidding for the birds and beasts, boys. But just and trust, on the down the line. What do you want? What do you want? As long as I'm playing money, that's fine. Back off front, picking out to your pulpit, put your spikes out, back to your blame your street cred voice. With my aim wide for the place of the breast. Ridicule Chris, I don't wanna try the best. People out here who are trying to live, people who care, what do you give? So many parasites, people that sweat, so many fucking things of what they get. Talking about your standards and rules, and then I'm back when I'm stuck down the phone. See me on the drivers, shoveling shit. Run and niggas to the crime like me. Fight for the action, you're clap out. Stateside patterns, just for your fault. Then you put me on the sentence. You can read a swing retreat. Don't run the stuff to Wilfred. Piss off your fucking thing.
I mean, I don't know. I really am lost in all that in a certain respect, because there's so many angles to it, but there's also one glaringly obvious angle, which is, egos, money, and passing the buck, which is what it's about, and appeasement of guilt in each of us, and everybody that just pays the $5 and sits back and watches the next program. And it's not enough. It could never be enough. I'm not sure what could be, what route one could get to where it's enough. At the moment, I'm concerned with the individual I come across each day, and that's enough of a challenge for me at the moment.
For the first few months of 1977, the rocks and black hole in the wet London streets, drain hole for the painted sewer rats, played host to a phenomenon. Out from the dark caves where anarchy had hidden its face these last years. Out again to the streets, the voice of hope, the cry of futures that was buried in the narcotic fuck-up of the 60s. Punk came out to air its dirty wings, crashing out from the stagnant mire that was the Beach Boys' sperm at Malibu Beach, the Beatles' death pickings in Madison Square Garden. The Pistols, the Damned, the Clash, the Stranglers, the Jam, new sounds, new vocabulary, the dirty little Roxy bounced to the new energy, and Wall Street and the city pricked up their dollar-ringing ears. Within 6 months, the new anarchy was bought out, the capitalist counter-revolutionaries killed with cash. Punk shot from being a movement of change to becoming the biggest media bonanza since hippie. In 6 months, it became a burnt-out memory of how it might have been, bought up, cleaned up, and souped up, just another cheap product for the consumer character.